Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. If you're not familiar with Career Club, please check us out at career.club, where we're using proven sales and marketing techniques to help people like you find a career that's important to you. We're also really pleased to announce an innovation for employers who are needing to take workforce actions. We are bringing human-centric approaches to helping affected employees move on with their careers with what we call next placement. So if you're an employer and you are looking at having to take workforce actions, please check us out at career.club and next placement. So with that, I am extremely pleased to introduce a friend and former boss, Jared Schrieber. Jared, welcome.
Hello, great to see you again, Bob.
It's great to see you. So Jared is the author of a new book called Breakout Brands, which talks about why some brands make it and others don't. And Jared, I'm going to read your description because I love your LinkedIn page description, where you say that you're the father of 3 teens, a unicorn, a robot in the book, which we just talked about. And Jared is also the co-founder and CEO of Numerator, or former CEO of Numerator, which many of you all know, as well as being the founder and president of Revolution Robotics Foundation. So, Jared, it is a real pleasure to have you on today.
It's great to be here, Bob. Thanks.
Awesome. No. So as is our want, we like to ask a couple of icebreaker questions to help people get to know you. Well, first of all, I'm going to go off script for a second. Where are you calling in from today? Where do we have you?
My new home of Budapest, Hungary, actually. Been here for 4 years now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, but where were you born and raised?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, but the core of it would be Phoenix, Arizona, and around there, but all over the Western U.S.
Yeah, nice. And then where did you go to school?
So undergrad at Arizona State University, and then master's at MIT, business for undergrad and systems engineering for master's.
Wow. Now tell us a little fun fact about what you did at ASU.
Well, I tried to be a football player back with Jake Plummer, Pat Tillman, and all those guys. Got to know them in the process, but I wasn't quite good enough. But I was a decathlete and javelin thrower on the track and field team, and competed. Had a great time there.
Now, we will talk about some of your passions outside of work in a second. A little bit about your family, because we talked about father of 3 teenagers.
Yes. So married for almost 25 years now to my college sweetheart, who was on the tennis team at ASU. Kept her stateside for a long time, and now she's getting me back to her home country of Hungary. We have 3 kids. One of them is studying material science at Oxford. Our daughter just accepted a rowing scholarship to University of Virginia. And our youngest, it's too young to tell. He's sophomore in high school.
Wow. You guys should be very proud, and I'm sure that you are. You've had a very, very interesting career trajectory. I know that people would really enjoy kind of hearing some of the things that you've done that have led you to where you are today.
Oh, boy. Well, some of my first jobs were working in retail on the retail sales floor, whether it was Big Five Sporting Goods, for example, where I sold shoes and sporting goods. And I saw firsthand the effects of merchandising and the role that packaging played in terms of driving the merchandising, attracting consumers and driving sales. I later worked at Blockbuster Video, where I became a store manager, and I learned very quickly about how slight nudges by salespeople on the floor or via merchandising cues could really influence consumer behavior and change what movie they were going to watch, or whether they bought an extra Coke and a candy along with their purchase.
And from there?
Oh boy. Well, then I actually got a degree and could get better jobs. So from there, I went to Intel back in the heyday of the late 90s and early 2000s. So rode the dot-com boom and the bust. That's what introduced me to working with data. Part of my job was to figure out what in the world was going on during the dot-com bust, because we didn't know at the time. All we knew is that we were producing twice as many CPUs and microchips as were actually being sold, and our warehouses were getting full, and we needed to understand why. And I was on point for a big part of that for Intel's supply chain, and I had to work with a ton of data across a ton of different systems to figure it out. And so I taught myself some coding, building data warehouses and decision support systems in the process. Really fell in love with that, working with data and building decision support analytics, and decided that's what I wanted to do for a career. And so that's what led me to MIT, where I could study kind of systems engineering and supply chain, and work on some of my own ideas that led me down an entrepreneurial journey.
And tell us a little bit about RSI, and then how maybe you parlay that into InfoScout.
Sure. So after MIT, I decided not to pursue my own ideas or join a startup quite then. I kept finding fatal flaws in each one that I interviewed with. And so I joined a company called Teradata, which at the time had all of the world's largest data warehouses. So all of Walmart's point of sale data and all the analytics, for example, were done there. Learned a ton from that process, and kept looking for startups. And I found one in Silicon Valley that we ended up pivoting to become Retail Solutions. And we convinced retailers to freely share their point of sale data with the brands who sold products through them. And we built all not only the pipes, but the business intelligence and analytics, so that the brands and retailers could work off of the same data and the same insights to drive better execution at retail together. So pricing, assortment, promotions, you name it. And it was actually that experience that led me to found InfoScout, which is now known as Numerator. There were so many brands who kept asking business questions around, this promotion I ran, I can see the sales lift, but is it truly incremental? Like, are existing customers just pantry stuffing at a discount? Because that's not really incremental. Or am I reaching new customers, consumers? Because that would be incremental. And point of sale data doesn't allow you to answer that. You actually have to get the data from consumers and on consumer behavior. And you can't do it within a single retailer. You have to understand how those consumers shop across all retailers. And so that's what led me to take a totally different approach to engaging consumers directly, to capture all of their purchases, no matter where they shopped or what they bought, down to the item level, via mobile apps. We basically got to ride the beginning of the mobile app wave and create an app that incentivized consumers to take pictures of their shopping receipts, no matter where they shopped or what they bought. And we read out the item level details and ended up tracking 1 million consumers over 1 billion shopping trips to understand consumer behavior better.
Yeah, well, your co-founder, John Braylig, and you did an amazing job of doing that. And I think I speak for everybody that spent any time at InfoScout / Numerator. That has just been a career highlight. And we're going to talk a little bit about company values and things like that in a little bit. But the company that you guys built, again, really has been a career highlight for so many folks. What do we find you doing these days with robotics and things like that?
Yeah, a few things. One of my passion projects, I had become a coach of my kids' robotics teams when we were in Silicon Valley. And so we turned our garage into a robotics lab for kids, and there were these annual competitions, and they and their friends would build robots to compete in those challenges. And I saw firsthand how amazing that could be, not only at inspiring them towards science and engineering, but also building life skills, creative problem solving, communicating ideas to others so that others can envision it as well, giving feedback constructively, taking it constructively. And so I really wanted other kids to have that opportunity. And what I felt like was the way robotics for kids has been done to date lends itself towards wealthy school districts with parents who are engineers, but won't get more widely adopted unless it's made much more accessible, both from an affordability standpoint and a complexity, and kind of a curriculum and content that's engaging. And so I've set out to solve those challenges with what I call the Revolution Robotics Foundation. And I think we're making great strides in terms of making robotics much more accessible for kids, so that anywhere you have enough resources for organized basketball, you have enough resources for organized robotics for kids as well.
No, that's phenomenal. I think something that you and I share is this stuff can be fun and it can be accessible by, a lot of people, not, as you said, sort of like an elite few. I'm on the advisory board of something called Perscolis. It is teaching technical skills to people who won't traditionally get a 4-year college degree. And so do I really need to know the Canterbury Tales to be a cybersecurity professional? Probably not. So I really applaud what you're doing, and you're putting sort of your money and your time towards what you believe. And I admire that about you. Outside of that, just for fun, where do we find Jared Schrieber of the weekend? What do you, if you're, to the extent you have time to goof off, what are you goofing off doing?
Well, an hour and a half outside of Budapest is a beautiful and a huge lake called Lake Balaton. It's larger than Lake Geneva. It's well over 100 miles around. We've got a small vineyard there where we are building a winery, and I love to stand up paddleboard and do so competitively now. So I love to get out on a lake, and a lot of people stand up paddleboard for leisure, and I just attack the water.
You continue to be the world's most interesting man, Jared. So let's dive into the book, because before we started pressing the record button, I said to you that I really do believe this book is going to become required reading for CPGs. It's data driven. It's not, I have a theory, but it's like, what does the data tell us, which I think is phenomenal. But do you mind just kind of providing an overview of why this book and why now?
Sure. Well, I think in a way you just hit on the core concept, which is here I'd worked helping thousands of brands use data to better drive results at retail for 15 years. And fundamentally, I didn't really have a particular theory of what are the tactics and techniques and levers to pull to really drive brand growth. Moreover, as the years went on, I became more and more confused, because we worked with Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola and Unilever and Nestle and all the greatest brands out there. And each one of them had kind of their own take and approach in terms of what to do to actually drive growth. Is it through greater household penetration? Is it through greater loyalty and buying frequency? And those are at the macro level. And then you could drill down 10 layers below that in terms of the role of advertising and how it drives growth. And so I felt like more and more our clients had very tactical requests related to answering business questions with the data. And yet what we were sitting on was the ability to answer the most fundamental strategic questions of all, which is what works and what doesn't in terms of driving long-term sustainable brand growth. And, along the way, I'd quasi become a disciple of Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass Institute that promoted a very specific view as it relates to how to grow brands. And at the same time, doing different analyses and studies, found some insights that seemed to contradict it. And so I really wanted to know and understand what works and what doesn't. And when I read Good to Great by Jim Collins, kind of the all-time business classic, I realized right then and there that that's the book I needed to write, except instead of doing it for companies, to do it for brands.
And again, because I'm a giant fan of Good to Great, and what I love about Collins's approach to that was the data will lead us to the answer. Rather than trying to backfill a presupposed answer with data that conforms to the conclusion. So, I know we're going to get into this. And this may be an unfair question before we dive into things, but is there one sort of outstanding aha that strikes you, that you got from all the analysis that you did?
Wow. I think it was one of the very starting tests we did on the data. So, there's a few. One is we studied 25,000 brands over a 4 to 5 year period to identify breakout winners, brands that really grew in terms of both their real retail sales and their market share in the category that they competed in, so that they didn't just ride a rising tide of the category. They had to beat out their competition to make our winners list. And what shocked me first is out of 25,000 brands, there were only about 60 that achieved 1.5% share market gains over a 3-year period. So basically, 4 years after the starting point of the study, they had only grown by 1.5% in market share, and grew their retail sales by 10 million a year on top of that. So any meaningful amount of retail sales in the US. And what I think about is those are goals that I would expect every brand manager to have. All 25,000 of those brand managers should have that as a standard goal that they're actually receive their pay and bonuses on and determine whether or not they're successful. But literally only 60 out of 25,000 made it. I mean, that's like taking all high school track and field athletes in America and looking at how many make the US Olympic team in any given year. So in terms of career projection and trajectory. So that's how hard it is to actually have a breakout or really successful brand. And I thought going in that the bar would be so much higher in terms of what kind of market share gains and retail sales gains would be necessary to be one of those elite brands.
So let's review that real quick. You achieved at least $10 million in incremental retail sales for
Sales.
3 years in a row.
Yeah, or a cumulative of 30 million over 3 years. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So,
And
so you could have it slightly flat, and market share grow by at least 0.5% per year for 3 years to 1.5% over 3 years.
How is that
so small? That's
that
so
should
small.
be how to not get fired.
That's my thinking. So that was like, are you kidding me? That's how low the bar is to be absolutely outstanding, to be in the top 1/2 of all brands. Was really shocking to me.
And then think about the billions of dollars that get poured in to try
to try and fuel that growth. Yeah.
Exactly.
And where does that money actually go?
So I think that just to level set people, it might be very helpful if we did just sort of a quick overview of, and maybe you'll describe this before we get started, the brand growth flywheel.
Sure. Gladly. So
maybe we can look at a visual of that one.
And as a step back, I mean, I think it's important for people to know, I didn't have a theory as to how brands grow. There were hypotheses, and my research team and I, and a shout out to Paul Stanley and Jake Brakowski, who are the leaders of that team doing a lot of the work. We set out to find what are all the different hypotheses about how brands grow, and we discovered like 30 something ones, from academic articles to industry thought leaders to some of our clients, and we tried to put those to the test against the data. And we started to find not only correlations in the data, but kind of causal directions. If you do this, it drives that. Mm-hmm. And as we started mapping out all of those kind of cause and effect and correlations into a causal graph, which is really state of the art of various complex systems and social sciences, when you try and understand behaviors of systems, you try and draw things in a causal graph, and marketing doesn't really have one. And so I set out to, like, how do we take all this evidence we have across every purchase of all these consumers, all the advertising, all the in-store pricing, all the online e-commerce activity reviews, put it all together. Mm-hmm. And as we started to map things out and just move these links of data points to, arrows to effects and causes to effects, this flywheel started to emerge, this loop, a reinforcing feedback loop that you can see as the core black in this diagram. This diagram I call the brand growth flywheel. And at the core of it are 4 key points: product attraction, purchase occasions, product experience, and brand equity, built around the product itself, that form the repeat loop that is the core driver of growth for brands on a sustainable, ongoing basis. And so, that is really, I would say, this summarizes all of the different findings of the book into something where you can understand how the different marketing levers feed into each other and the role that they play. But I think instead of treating like the 4 Ps of marketing as pillars or independent levers, I think it's really important that we understand that there are feedback loops at play here, and some activities reinforce gains or benefits or other levers in different ways. And this is what this really helps us understand.
And one of the things I think is really important, maybe for listeners to get, and hopefully readers of the book to get, is this cuts across all categories, all consumer types, right? Geographies. Is there anything that would be a caveat or a limiter to what this would apply to?
I think there could be in B2B instead of business to consumer. So this is consumer goods, and Correct. So I think it applies very strongly to consumer goods. Certainly, fast-moving consumer goods. I think even consumer durables and soft goods. This very much applies to still, and consumer services. I think if you read the book, you'd see some examples I give on the B2B front. So a lot. How did InfoScout grow? Well, it won its first business. It delivered an amazing product experience. Clients thought very highly of it. They were more likely to consider us the next time they had a business question or need. They bought again. They had another great experience. They were willing to tell colleagues in the industry about it, whether it was via webinars, speaking at conferences, or just as they moved jobs to another company. That's the social validation that further built the brand equity, which made our offerings even more attractive and considered for purchase when there was a relevant job to be done, and just created this reinforcing flywheel effect. And so, while I would say the heart of this data and the insights are built off of fast-moving consumer goods, the key learnings and findings are applicable across industries.
So thinking about, you start the book off with a story about Rouse, the spaghetti brand. I'm saying the name correctly. Maybe just at a high level, could you maybe sort of walk us through how Rouse sort of checked some boxes here and did a great job?
You've got it. So Rouse homemade pasta sauce is a brand I didn't even know existed. And it was one of our winning brands. And they'd grown to hundreds of millions in sales rather rapidly. What's interesting here is Rouse had been around for 27 years. It had been sold in retail for over 20 years. Why is it in this last 4-year stretch, 2016 through 2019, that its sales just continued to take off and gain more and more market share in the pasta sauce category? How'd they do it? Guess what? They had zero advertising. They spent no money on TV, radio, print, digital, anything that you would think would be necessary to grow. What they did is they had an amazing product that consumers loved. They had all natural, fresh ingredients, no corn syrup, no sugars, just amazing flavor. Anybody who tasted their product loved it. It was expensive. Instead of $2.50 a jar, it was $7 to $8 a jar. But they use that to their advantage. They basically go to retailers and say, yeah, you can sell 3 cans of the cheap stuff, and here's the revenue and margin you're going to make off that. Or you can sell 1 can of ours. Here's the revenue and margin you'll make, which are both higher. And your customers are going to love you for it because they are going to repeat buy our product over and over again. And if you carry it, you're going to get those sales. And they took a very data-driven sales approach to retailers. And this was their new president who came in 2015, who implemented this new strategy for go-to-market. And when he did, you see the trajectory of Rouse start to take off, and they won greater and greater distribution across more and more retailers. And with that distribution, they gained access to more consumers who, when they tried the product, loved it and started to repeat buy the product over and over again. And those consumers would tell their friends and family and others, who would then try and buy the product. And so I think it's an incredible example of product-led growth within the consumer goods industry, and that advertising had absolutely nothing to do with them, absolutely demolishing Barilla and so many Ragu and other brands that we all know of through their advertising.
Yeah. Well, it's a captivating story because, like you said, it just starts off with something highly counterintuitive, which is advertising was not where they went and poured a bunch of money into. So if we can just go back to the split screen for a minute, maybe it's a good point. There were 8 key findings, or sort of, I think my recollection is sort of 8 key findings, one of which you were just sort of touching on. Maybe it's a good opportunity to double click, which is the biggest difference between winning and losing brands' equity drivers is the extent to which consumers see their products as innovative or unique. Yes. It sounds like Rouse just nailed that one.
Absolutely. It was truly unique and differentiated in that regard. And so one of the things we did is BERA, which does a syndicated brand equity tracker for many years now across hundreds of brands, was the only data set out there that we could leverage to go back in time, look over that time stretch of 2016 through 2020, and say, for our winning and losing brands, how did their brand equity and the drivers of their brand equity change over that time? And what we found was, looking at over 144 different drivers of brand equity that BERA tracks, was that there were let's call it 9 of which that really stood out in terms of being big differentiators for the winning brands versus the losing brands. And of those, there were 2 that stood out to an extreme as being highly differentiating between the winning and losing brands. And that is the extent to which consumers found their products innovative or unique. That fundamentally, at the end of the day, having a differentiated product mattered most in terms of distinguishing winners from losers. And that is completely counter to what we've been taught over the last many years by, say, books like How Brands Grow, which would basically say differentiation doesn't matter. It's about brand distinction and the elements of branding, but not necessarily the product itself. They think the product is a commodity. And I think all of the data show, and the differences between our winners and losers show, is, well, you may think of pasta sauce as a commodity, but the winning brand was one that actually differentiated itself on a product basis, not on a distinctive brand basis.
Yeah. And I mean, I read, memorized how brands grow because, like you say, some of our really big clients like Procter were quite deep into what that was about. And
Mm-hmm.
yet unlearning some of that stuff, it's like, well, it sounds
Mm-hmm.
good, but what
Mm-hmm.
the data actually shows is something different.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
for folks, just kind of back on methodology, this relied very heavily on Numerator data, which is the longitudinal consumer panel to be able
Mm-hmm.
to track purchases over time from the exact same households.
Right.
So it weren't lookalike households. This was the same household. And the point about that, I think, is really important. Maybe this kind of takes us to another, for me, was a very key finding, was the repeat and consecutive repeat metric.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Sure. So I think capturing and understanding the extent to which consumers not only try but repeat buy a brand has been known for decades and is measured by all the different providers, and brands pay attention to this. However, I don't think they've really understood or appreciated the essence of what it means and implies, and in part because they're measuring anytime repeat. Does the customer ever come back and buy that brand again? Well, under the hood of that and driving that is something much more important and fundamental, which is they buy the given brand, they use it, they try it, they use it. On their very next purchase occasion for that type of product, do they repeat buy the brand or do they buy something else? This is the consecutive repeat purchase rate.
Yeah.
It was something first discovered in the 1950s on the first sets of consumer panel data by a scientist from the Manhattan Project who got his hands on the data and discovered, these fundamental laws of science related to thermodynamics and other behaviors actually applied to consumer data. And it got lost. This finding got lost. And why did it get lost? Because if you're Nielsen and you're having to run databases and calculations for clients that you can consistently run and repeat, well, that old database technology wouldn't actually allow you to calculate a consecutive repeat. You could sum the number of times somebody had bought something, and if they'd bought it twice or more, then it's a repeat. So that's really easy. Figuring out whether or not on their very next occasion for that same category of product, they bought the same brand again, actually is computationally intensive. And so we lost track of this metric because it was too hard to report on. Well, now modern database-based technology, we can do that again. And so what we found and what we actually proved mathematically, and it's also in the book as kind of the proof behind this in the appendix for those who are more science-oriented, is that actually consecutive repeat rate is the fundamental indicator that we can measure of a consumer's probability to purchase your brand on any given occasion. And fundamentally, as a brand manager or marketer, what you're trying to do is shift a consumer's probability of buying your brand versus any other brand on the next occasion. And the single best way to actually measure that is consecutive repeat purchase rate.
So again, I think what you just said in terms of the data now allows us to understand this air quote nuance, which isn't a nuance, it's a fundamental driver of something here. But if back on product uniqueness and innovativeness and just product quality, does the product do what it purports to do better than other category participants? Well, there's a real strong link between, am I repeat buying this because it's on promotion again? What's probably not on promotion again, right?
Right.
But now I tried it. Hey, that was significantly better than maybe what I've been using to satisfy, that usage occasion previously. I'm going back to that.
That's exactly right. And that, by the way, you spoke about promotions. So promotions, everybody sees sales lift when they run a promotion. Yes. The question is what happens afterwards. And if you use point of sale data, you tend to see, well, not much happens afterwards. So all of that lift from a promotion was incremental. If you study and track consumer behavior over a longer period of time, what you actually see is those consumers who bought on promotion, the very next time they go back to buy that brand, they are less likely to buy the same brand again as a result of having bought it on promotion, because it has now anchored their price expectations related to what this product is worth at a lower level. And so it's one of the reasons in our data sets we found that the winning brands that grew year over year over year did less in-store price promotions than the losing brands. And the losing brands tended to rely on more and more and more in-store price-related promotions, a la temporary price reductions, TPRs, et cetera. And so it's again one of these counterintuitive things where you think you can measure sales lift from promotions, but what you're measuring is in a very short period of time, this short increase in sales velocity.
Yep.
But what's actually happening under the hood is a decrease in brand momentum. And that decrease in brand momentum has long-term effects for the sustainable growth of the brand.
Well, that is going to be a hard drug to get some people off of.
For sure.
Because the CPG industry is pretty much grounded in the economics.
That's right.
Trade promotion dollars. And
That's
yet
right.
it's definitely to the brand's peril that they play this game.
It is, but they can play it more wisely than they do today. So don't get me wrong. I do think there should be a shift away from trade promotions to brand promotions. I think could make a pretty compelling data-driven argument with that, with decades of data in the book. But let's say you can't change that. What can you do? Well, shift more of the trade funds towards new products. Right. Shift more of the trade funds towards attachment rates of your brand in one category with your brand in another category. So you get consumers who like your brand in one category, buying your brand in adjacent or another category where they don't already do so. Dove was a huge winner with this. People knew Dove lotions. They knew the soaps. Were they using it for shampoo? Were they using it for deodorant? Were they using it for others? And by getting that brand attachment from, say, Dove bar soap to all of a sudden Dove deodorant. Dove deodorant was one of the huge breakout brands in our category. Procter & Gamble is brilliant at this. They didn't just do it within a brand, but Febreze, for example, was a breakout brand. They started advertising other products in the laundry category or home goods category that had Febreze in it. And as a result, sales of actual Febreze products rose and rose. And so that's an example where you can wisely use your trade spend with and through retailers to actually drive meaningful growth versus focusing it entirely on this product on sale now.
Correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like as a trial vehicle, it's a great idea. As a repeat vehicle, maybe not so much.
That's exactly it. That's one of the key findings is you can drive trial and it can be worth it via discounts and advertising and other things. Those are the best times to use trade promotions and to use advertising is when something is new. However, on an ongoing basis, I think the money can be invested a lot more wisely than it is today.
And again, back to the flywheel. But if the product experience is really, really good and it is clearly superior and preferred by a consumer, they will go back to it, and you can measure that.
That's exactly. It's instantly measurable, and it's not time bound. It's not tied to particular marketing activities. It's independent of time.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because this is actually another huge thing. There's sort of this ongoing debate between loyalty and expanding household penetration.
That's right. Yep.
And people tend to fall in one camp or the other.
Sure.
And what says Jared? What says the data?
So I agree with How Brands Grow and Byron Sharp and others that you cannot grow a brand without both. You must grow household penetration and you must grow repeat purchase activity or buying rate or other things. That it's often known as the double jeopardy law of marketing or brand growth. It is true. The question is why it is true and how you leverage why it is true to drive growth. And so what we found is it's not as simple as just getting more people, including light category buyers, to try your brand, because the light category buyers don't buy the category very often, and therefore they don't buy your brand very often, and therefore you don't get many repeat purchases from them. So what we actually found in the data was no, winning brands do not outperform losing brands in terms of gaining sales from light category buyers or gaining household penetration on light category buyers. The way that they differentiated themselves was by getting a higher proportion of their sales from the heavy category buyers, the people who know the category inside and out, the people for whom this category means something in their life and how they live their life. They've tried and tested everything. And the winning brands are the ones who win among the heavy category buyers. They get all of their heavy purchase activity, which results in revenue growth. But also, think about anything in life. The people who are experts on something influence the people who are not experts on something. The people who are heavy category buyers, their behaviors influence the behaviors of light category buyers, not the other way around. It's not light category buyers influencing what happens with heavy category buyers. And I think that's what's got lost in the discussion over the last decade or two. And what we've I think very compellingly shown with data is you've got to win with the heavy category buyers, and you have to win their repeat purchase activity, ongoing, continuous, year over year. And if you do that, you're going to have a killer brand. And if you don't, you're going to have a losing brand.
And if we go back, we don't have to flash it up in the flywheel, right? I mean, we certainly see the effect of reviews, social media, and just as consumers, we all know it. Like, particularly if I'm a light category buyer, by definition, I don't know a lot about the category, ostensibly. Mm-hmm. So let me go to people who do know a lot about the category, and who's winning that battle?
Who has the most online reviews? For example, you're trying a new product for the first time. Which product has the best shelf placement? Which product has the most shelf facings? You know, which one is eye level? If you look it up online, which one has the most reviews? And by the way, more and more of those online reviews are starting to make their way onto the shelf in physical stores and retail. I'm seeing it more and more in Europe, and I know it's starting to happen in the US. And so fundamentally, that's where brands need to look, is to understand the behaviors and drivers of behavior of the heaviest category buyers, win there, and as a result, they will actually gain more.
They're the gravity that pulls along the light category user.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So let's see. This is a good one. This is around demographics and the way that brands will say, hey, we're winning with a certain demographic. What we should do then is double down, and we're going to own that demo.
Absolutely. Yes.
Isn't that a great idea? Isn't that what they should be doing?
Yeah, because it's easy, right? So it's your lowest hanging fruit. You're basically like, wow, our response rates or our customer acquisition cost is so much lower among this demographic. We're already winning. Let's just spend more and more there. And in reality, it turns out to be kind of a fool's errand. It limits the scope of what your brand can become among the total category and category buyers. And so what we saw happening was, as winning brands grew, their consumers looked more and more like consumers of the overall category, and the losing brands tended to look more and more like a niche or a concentration within the category. And so I'm trying to think of a good example. Modelo is a great example. You know, so it's a Mexican beer, and instead of doubling down all of their brand positioning and marketing and distribution where they were historically strongest, which was high Hispanic areas and consumers, they did everything they could to broaden their reach to just represent Americans at large. If you look at their advertising, if you look at their sampling campaigns in bars and restaurants across the country, everything that they did in their positioning was to try and be the most popular Mexican beer among Americans at large, as opposed to being the most popular Mexican beer among Mexicans. Another example similar was Mission tortillas versus Guerrero tortillas. You know, Guerrero positioned itself from its packaging in Spanish with words in Spanish to its website, very focused on traditional Spanish recipes. Mission was just trying to appeal to everybody and why they might want to use a tortilla at all, maybe a chicken Caesar wrap in a tortilla, for example. And they provide recipes for tons of different ways of leveraging tortillas. And Mission grew and grew, and Guerrero didn't.
And so the lesson is, look as much as you can or appeal to the category buyer, the category demographics.
That's right. That's right. If you really want to grow market share in your category, then you need your buyers to look like the makeup of the category, as to being some kind of unique niche within it.
So kind of last thing, well, actually talk about occasions, because if we look at the flywheel, it really does sort of begin with occasions, or
That's right.
need states or the other terms that people might use.
Occasions is the crux of the flywheel. So look, it's product centric. You can only do so much if you don't have a great product. So it is a little bit of a product led growth type flywheel. But the ticker or the counter of how often this spends has to do with purchase occasions. And this is the other aha moment. Very early in the research, putting some hypotheses to the test, we said, which metric best explains year over year growth for the winning brands versus the losing brands? And we were like, well, unit sales should be one of the highest, right? Or household penetration, like, percent of people who buy the product at all should be it. And we tested a whole bunch of different metrics. Guess what came out on top? The number of purchase occasions, not how much they bought, when they bought. It was just total number of purchase occasions won. It wasn't how many units were sold, because what turns out is some brands lowered their prices to sell more units, but that doesn't drive overall total sales growth, especially on a year over year basis. That's not sustainable growth. And it wasn't household penetration, which shocked us. We couldn't believe that purchase occasions outperformed household penetration. And so that led us down just really trying to understand the mechanics of how that could be and why, and led us to the final insights that we provided in this book.
Well, you think about, I know that you cite this one in the book too, but like hard seltzer, in theory, it's in the beer category, right? And so
right. if like White Claw and these kind of brands, right?
Yeah, Truly and whoever else is in the category, right? And if I'm now going, well, wait a minute, am I going to have a beer or am I going to have a hard seltzer? And hard seltzer starts winning that occasion more and more often. Guess what? You have these brands that just all of a sudden have tremendous growth.
That's exactly right.
Because they're winning that usage occasion, not just competing within the category for household penetration.
Exactly right. Yeah, and sometimes it just comes down to the job to be done. What's the job to be done? And in the case of beer, it's often, okay, little bit of alcohol, socially, acceptable way to drink alcohol, have a conversation, have some flavor, have some refreshments. Well, hard seltzer can do that too, and it's not as heavy, and there's more different flavors, and so in other words, it created itself as an alternative to beer, at getting that job done, of being this light, refreshing, socially acceptable way to have a little bit of alcohol, and did an excellent job of it, and provide variety when you're hosting and other things. And White Claw, among those brands, really stood out as a winner.
Well, there's a whole other piece of this conversation I want to start getting into, but I hope that folks are already seeing that there is just a wealth of insight to be gleaned from Breakout Brands. And again, I think the beauty of it is that it's all grounded in data. I wanted to kind of move the conversation over for just a minute, Jared, if I could, to career advice. And again, I'm just effusive in my praise for the culture that you guys built at InfoScout, and I want to say that we built, because culture is.
Yeah, you're a part of it. It's a team effort.
But I just remember some things, and particularly transparency to a fault. Which that's just tattooed in my brain, and you guys lived that one so well. But you've had a very cool career, and there's been some. I think there's definitely a narrative that crosses all the interesting stops that you've had in your career. You go after things that are interesting to you. You find a topic that you're interested in, and then you kind of dig in and get smarter in it.
Curious cat.
And then where's an unmet need in your passion area, and then how do you go rush to fill that? But maybe talking about your kids, the way I usually phrase the question is, what advice would you give 25-year-old Jared? Maybe you're already giving that advice to at least two of your kids. But what would be some overarching career advice that you would give folks listening to this?
Wow. I think generally find either areas of industry, areas of human need or interest that you yourself have some kind of gleaning or interest to. Work in an industry or a field where you feel some kind of inclination, curiosity, calling, appeal. It makes life so much easier than if you're working in an industry where you're just like, oh, I like what I do, but what the company does or what this industry does sucks. It makes it harder to get up every day and motivate yourself. And I think we can all be our best when we're more highly motivated and we're we're just and that tends to happen when we're aligned in our interests versus what the company's interests are and what it's doing and working on. And so I would say, if you're younger, figure out the kinds of things you're passionate about. For me, I realized, wow, I love pulling together data to answer questions with data as opposed to opinion. Like, I just became passionate about that. I'm like, I can't believe we make decisions any other way, because so often the decisions are so arbitrary. Like, why not have some facts to inform us and back it up? And I just became passionate about that. And I know it's kind of nerdy, but it's what led me in the direction that I went. And I'm super excited about that. And so, I look at my oldest studying material science at Oxford. He's loved chemistry. He loved physics. He loved them both. He could never decide between the two. And well, how do you put them together? Material science. Right. And so two subjects he loves, he's able to combine into a unique specialty that's really valuable. And by the way, he loves space, he loves energy technology. Well, material science is really important for those two, and it helps him continue to explore in those directions. And so it's kind of a synthesis for him.
Well, speaking of how brands grow, that's actually, and we teach this to our clients, it's essentially the hedgehog concept. What are you really good at? What are you interested in? What drives your economic model?
Sure.
Right. And basically it's the hedgehog concept. So
absolutely.
You've done a ton of hiring, and I've even been on the other end of your interviews. But what are some of the talent qualities, Jared, that you look for when you're hiring folks?
I think most important for me is creative and collaborative problem solvers. People who love to solve problems, and they love to do so with others in a collaborative way versus lock me in a corner and let me just figure it out myself. And the creativity aspect. So our education system and all education systems are highly geared towards convergent thinking and training convergent thinking towards a single answer, one approach to get one answer. And so much of business and life is about coming up with the best possible way that, and to understand that, you have to be able to understand what the possible paths forward are and evaluate the pros and cons and then choose one based on that. And so a lot of what I've tried to do in hiring practices is identify if the candidate or individual really enjoys solving problems, is creative in terms of how they can go about it, can demonstrate that, and especially from a divergent standpoint. And then are they able to do so collaboratively? If you offer new information, if you offer a counter opinion, how do they respond and react to that? Do they get defensive? Do they argue their point? Are they not able to synthesize that new information you've just given in order to come up with a better answer and a better path forward? To me, that's probably the biggest essence that I'm looking for in a candidate.
Well, what I love about that is that's a really interesting blend of hard skills and just sort of the mental hardware that you come to the party with, but also the softer skills, right? And the ability to take feedback in, like you said, and the ability to collaborate with others, because we don't work in a corner by ourselves. Even when we're working virtually, we're not working by ourselves. We might be alone, but we're not working by ourselves. And I think that's such a great insight on your part. Again, at the risk of just being gratuitous, I think that the way that you led InfoScout, you had modeled a lot of great behavior for me. What are some key leadership traits that you would share with folks? Some maybe that you learned a harder way, and maybe some that come to you more naturally.
I think I learned the hard way at Intel, which was a very alpha dominant, aggressive culture where the loudest, firmest voice, strongest opinion kind of won the day. That I learned from that experience that is not, I started to become like that. And I realized during my grad school years, that is not who I wanted to be as a leader. And so I think I maybe overcorrected at times in terms of trying to really create an environment where there were many voices at the table. Not everybody had the same weight in terms of the end decision, but everybody felt like they had a voice to be heard and could contribute to coming up with the right or best answer at the end of the day. And that just became very important to me in terms of how we ran a company, is that everybody has different perspectives, experience that they can contribute to this. that if you want them to make the right decision on their own, you have to give them additional context and perspective so that when you're not in the room, they can make the right decision. And so just creating that kind of environment where there's free flow of information. Information within a company is not a source of power. That if you have information and somebody else doesn't, that's actually not a good thing. That we want that free flow to help make the right decision, whether it's collectively or individually.
Well, I remember that we had David Taylor, who you may have met along the way, as CEO of P&G, and David was on, almost a year ago now, but he had a saying that says, "None of us is better than all of us."
All of us.
And isn't that great?
Yeah.
And we also had Johnny Taylor, who's the CEO of SHRM, on, and something that I really felt like I learned from him. And this is around diversity and inclusion kinds of topics. Mm-hmm. But to your point, you've got people from all kinds of different backgrounds with different points of view and experiences to bring to the table. The key is treating people, with respect and having dialogue, even disagreements, but having them with a civil spirit and treating people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's critical. And I think I always wanted people to know that they were respected, whether or not agreed or disagreed, that they were respected. Yeah. And that we treat people as opposed to people as employees. Yes. Hopefully you always felt like you were Bob Goodwin first and a kick-ass business development guy second, but you were a person first, and you got treated that way in all dealings, interactions, and communications, regardless of what your role or responsibility was with the company.
Yeah. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. Jared, I could stay and chat with you for a couple hours, no problem. We could even go have a beer usage occasion. But this is awesome. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, whether it's on the book or career kinds of stuff, that you want to share with people before we let you go?
One thing that I just like to share with people, especially as they become managers or maybe they're further in their management career, is if you care about your employees or your colleagues, you owe it to them to provide them feedback, whether or not it's positive feedback or critical, constructive feedback. Like, if you care about people, you owe it to them to help them get better and make them better, whether they ask for that advice or perspective or not. And I think we need to have the guts and courage to do that with each other, that if we care about them, that we tell them kind of what we see and observe. And there was a technique I learned along the way that I found really effective called the 2-minute coach that most people aren't familiar with. And you're familiar with it because we tried to make sure people at InfoScout and Numerator were. And it's if you're going to have this conversation with a team member and you see something that didn't happen right, instead of calling them out for, you shouldn't have done that, this and that, you just state what you observed. I noticed this and this happened, and you shut up and you listen to that person explain from their perspective what happened and why it happened. And by not making any accusations or critical judgment at first, often I've learned, holy cow, I didn't know that was going on. There's way more to this story than I expected. But often it creates an opportunity to have a conversation about, hey, what is the goal, or what was expected there? Yes. And what could be done differently next time? And what's a better path forward? And so I just feel like that's a really effective approach for showing somebody that you actually care for them to be at their best. And I'd highly encourage everybody to really take it upon themselves to help make their colleagues and their employees better. I think everybody fundamentally at the end of the day wants to be a better version of themselves. Yeah. So that's what I would encourage.
I think that's awesome. I know that our good friend Scott Anderson, would always say feedback is a gift, right? Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Jared, because as a self-confessed people pleaser, sometimes sometimes that feels confrontational. And I'm being mean or whatever. And it definitely does not have to be that way at all. And something that you said in that with the, kind of state the observation and then be quiet. One of the things that we used to talk a lot about, and it's really stayed with me, is assuming good intent.
That's right.
And you may not have all the facts. And like to go on the warpath or to be aggressive or whatever, just making judgments where you have an incomplete fact base.
100%. That's
right?
exactly right. That is the most common error and mistake. You just make a judgment thinking you have the context and knowledge because you saw it. You saw what happened. And honestly, I think that's often the worst thing that you can possibly do if you're trying to help somebody improve or get the best outcome out of a difficult situation.
Yeah. So again, I need to put a period on this sentence here at some point. So we'll make that right now. Jared, just phenomenal content. I can't recommend the book enough. I'm waiting for your next book where you share some of your management leadership skills and beliefs. But this has been great. Thank you so much. Again, really encourage folks to order Breakout Brands on Amazon. It's a phenomenal read. It's accessible. It's got the nerdy appendix, but for people like me, I can read the words and it all makes sense. So with that, Jared, it's great seeing you. Thank you so much for appearing, and thank you everybody for taking a few minutes to listen.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
I know you're